Health Organization declared coronavirus disease of 2019 a worldwide public health emergency of international significance on January 30, 2020, and a pandemic on March 11, 2020. Worldwide, the number of infections and deaths continues to rise. Many people will have been infected, sick, and many deaths have happened. Thus, the World Health Organization advocated the disease to prevent the presence of COVID-19 by self-isolation, social isolation, wearing face masks, improving healthcare systems, hand washing, and surface cleaning. So, this COVID-19 pandemic causes abstract and drastic changes in human life. This situation poses a challenge to the global education system because over 28 million Filipino students at all levels of education must remain at home and follow the Philippine government's quarantine requirements. School institutions decided to implement the new educational standard in response to these circumstances. For the school year 2020 to 2021, the Department of Education will assume the Learning Continuity Plan or LCP at the elementary level, and the Commission on Higher Education was allowed academic independence in higher education and mandated the implementation of distance learning, e-learning, and other innovative means of delivery for students. They have always believed that education must continue regardless of the current and future development and risks. This prompted us to conduct this research to ascertain students' learning styles, challenges, motivation, and coping mechanism during the pandemic, where an outstanding teaching and learning environment for school has happened. Many academic institutions that were hesitant to change their traditional pedagogical approach were forced to transition entirely to online teaching learning. Indeed, it is a challenging task that affects children and teachers, schools, parents, and the government. There are numerous challenges to online learning, ranging from learner issues to educator issues and content issues, because it is difficult for institutions to engage students and involve them in the teaching learning process. But despite the increased stress and hurdles, students can discover a glimmer of hope in the remote learning practice, where employed a combination of personal coping strategies. Thus, this activity will include self-motivation and connecting with friends and family to relieve anxiety. However, motivation is still an essential factor in learning, where healthy students will link by their intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, because there is more time and self-regulated learning in blended learning environments. Student self-motivation and self-management become more important. This approach will provide a broader perspective regarding students' learning styles, motivation, difficulties, and coping mechanism amidst the pandemic. Furthermore, if the pandemic continues to grow over time, this study is a foundation for solution to the education system.
Let me discuss to you the framework of the study. Conceptual framework, it consists of relevant variable of the study and maps out how they might relate each other. In our study, it consists 4 phases, which is learning style, motivation, difficulties, and coping mechanism. Learning style includes the different learning styles of the students and ways of being motivated in times of the COVID-19 pandemic, such as being with the family and self-efficacy. Numerous difficulties of the students, such as poor technological skills, accessibility, personal issues or concerns, and unstable internet connection, in which are the parameters based on numerous studies, wherein some indicated that most of the students might have a problem with it. Coping mechanism. The students' coping strategies is to asking others for assistance, taking responsibilities for the situation, maintaining emotional composure, and expressing distressing emotions. In this part, learning styles, motivation, difficulties, and coping mechanism may influence of the affect the students amidst the pandemic.
Research design. The researcher will use cross-sectional, comparative, and non-experimental quantitative research design in collecting the data needed. A cross-sectional research design is used to gather data using a Google Sheet form containing the survey intended to be answered by Bachelor of Elementary Education students from first year up to fourth year level. It allows the researcher to observe their learning styles, motivations, difficulties, and coping mechanisms during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is carried in a natural setting and does not include modifying the circumstances, events, conditions, or individuals. The researchers performed the study at the school as mentioned above, since it is perfect for the study and occurred at this school, eliminating issues in the research procedure and the research study itself. Additionally, the study notes that they were purposely picked to complete the questionnaires. Research respondents. The research subjects are first year to fourth year B Ed undergraduate students at Isabela State University, Kawayan Campus, composed of 414 students who serve as the study of population. The required number of respondents, 203 student respondents at 95% confidence level, and a response distribution of 50% and 5% margin of error. The recommended sample size is at least 200. Table 1 represents the stratified proportional random sampling of every year level and sex. Research instruments. The researchers disseminate surveys via Google Form to gather a considerable amount of detailed data on the students' learning styles, difficulties, motivations, and coping mechanisms amidst the pandemic. It provides an easy way for respondents to answer the survey in an online form. The researchers use Google Forms to consider the pandemic to provide a safe way with no physical contact with other people. In this way, the respondents will be way more comfortable answering the survey questionnaire. The instruments consist of questions and statements which determine their learning styles, difficulties, motivations, and coping mechanisms. The research instruments consist of 5 parts. The first part is the demographic profile, which name is optional, sex, age, course, and year, and ethnicity. The second part is learning styles, consisting of 29 questions answered by the respondents to determine whether they are auditory, visual, or kinesthetic learners. The third part of the survey comprises 12 questions for determining the student's motivation. The fourth part has a total of 54 statements that deal with the student's difficulties. The fifth part consists of 20 statements for a student's coping mechanisms. The statements on learning styles, difficulties, and coping mechanisms are based on whether the respondents never answered, rarely, sometimes, often, and always. On the other hand, statements on motivation are answered firmly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. The total of questions and statements is 127 items. The survey will require 20 to 30 minutes of answering.
The respondents of this study are the 203 students composed of 33 male students and 170 female students, who represent the entire populace of the BEd students on the campus. Concerning the ages of these respondents, the respondents' age ranges from 18 years old to 25 years old. 31.5 of the respondents fell in the 19 years of age and were the most numbered respondents in terms of age. Further, it had found that most 61.1% of the respondents belonged to the Ilocano ethnic group. Generally, it shows that the respondents sometimes employ these learning styles in online learning during the pandemic. With these 29 learning styles, the learning styles when studying I prefer to have a silent surrounding. I find PowerPoint is useful in clarifying concepts,
Reviewing words on a PowerPoint helps me remember the information. I remember to have food to eat while studying, and I like to pay attention to the visual design of things. Our top 5 learning styles that are often employed or used by the respondents in their online learning during this time of pandemic. It can be drawn that the silent surrounding is the preferred learning environment of the respondents, and the visual learning material made in the PowerPoint presentation serves as a very useful learning aid for the respondents. It appears that these students learn best when information is presented visually and in picture or design format. They benefit from information obtained from the pictures and diagrams in textbooks. Also, these students tend to like to work in the quiet room rather than work in study groups. The least favored learning approaches of the respondents during this pandemic are: I would rather study the content in the Word file than listen to the lecturer, and I tend to doodle during online class by scribbling on any sheet of paper I find. The significant finding of the respondents' motivation is that the respondents generally agree on the set of motivations. The top 3 motivations of the respondents are: motivation is the most important aspect influencing learners' success. My energy distinguished by the formation of feelings and reactions, and I am improving my skills and knowledge because of online learning. It can be discerned that respondents affirm that motivation is an aspect that may influence one's success. According to Akbar and Hawadi 2001, educational success can achieve through various elements that influence the student's internal and external circumstances. As a result, 2 categories have emerged of motivation in learning: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation comes from within the individual that derives enjoyment from the activity itself, or from the sense of accomplishment that comes from finishing or even working on the task, because it is the child's inherent sense of interest, urgency, confidence, and satisfaction when executing a job that motivates them. Harmer 2001, on the other hand, extrinsic motivation does not rule out the possibility that a student will enjoy studying or completing a task. It simply means that the pleasure they expect from some internal reward will remain in a motivation even if the activity is at hand and interesting. Pintrich and Shank, 1996. All students who studied had quite varied reasons for wanting to learn during this COVID-19 pandemic. Students' subjective experiences, particularly those who related to their willingness to participate in lessons, learning activities, and their reasons for doing so, are the heart of student motivation.
With the 52 learning difficulties categorically clustered, which is sometimes experienced by the respondents, still there are 9 learning difficulties which often experience, 39 learning difficulties which sometimes experience, and 4 learning difficulties which is rarely experienced by the respondents. The top 5 learning difficulties which the respondents often experience are mainly: I use my mobile phone, computer, laptop, or tablet. I need work, school, life balance. I am concerned about the future, particularly about their employment, graduating, passing, and progress in school delayed. They also stated that they are nervous about the pandemic and generally adjusting to changing study environment. So the most frequently cited concerns of the participant responses included concerns about how the quality of their education may be impacted, and personal concerns like their physical health and balancing their work, school, and family priorities. Many health concerns have been caused by staying at home, and it reduced their school excitement. According to Shaw, Gomes,
Polotskaya and Jankowska in the year 2015 is that when students have poor physical health, various forms of educational difficulties are found. Also, they also have difficulties in the transition to remote learning or in their asynchronous learning. Thus, many challenges with asynchronous learning, especially in the fields of keeping online classroom schedules, setting homework time, gathering study materials, and studying on the job and practical lessons or practical work lessons, and solving tests or exams online with. So all these problems are similar to many literary texts. Thus, there will be difficulty in learning everything since it is hard to retain information when the lectures or the lessons are not conducted face to face. Others might understand that the transition was necessary, but most of them prefer face-to-face instruction and no longer feel like they are learning anything and are just trying to get their work handed in on time. Students were under a lot of stress as they reflected not just on COVID-19 pandemic, but also on their academic credentials. In addition to being concerned about the COVID-19 pandemic, most participants were concerned about lack of motivation and inability to conform to the new academic structure. The respondents work on reopening the class, simulation time, and having uncertainty new school year. They were also concerned that if the pandemic situation was maintained, the post-pandemic circumstances would put enormous pressure on them to finish the course content quickly. Next, we have the coping strategies, which we have the top 3 coping strategies or mechanism of the respondents. So these are: I pray to God whenever I face hardships in life. I make a plan to organize my time and schedule. And lastly, I offer positive help to others when they have difficulties in using the platforms like Zoom, Edmodo, and Google Meet. So it appears that the participants' main coping mechanisms is having a strong foundation and systematizing their time and schedule. It means that their faith as a coping mechanism can be a powerful source in the provision of comfort, peace, and resolution. They cope with difficulties in various ways. Rather than falling into the more destructive mechanisms, they often manage to act in a more positive and helpful ways. In agreement, Floss, Wang, and others in the year 2020 believes that keeping a good outlook and trying to be positive would help one flush out this constant overload of negative or discouraging reports, illness numbers, and how it is spreading. Holding a good outlook will make them reflect on something that can give them what they need to get through the day. It is exceptionally relevant nowadays that optimistic students are more likely to be resilient in the face of hardships. It was found out that learning styles has a moderate positive correlation to motivation. Likewise, it also has a weak positive correlation to learning difficulties and coping mechanisms. All these relationships of learning styles have been found statistically significant. Motivation, as a variable, has a very weak positive correlation to learning difficulties and has a weak positive correlation to coping mechanisms. So it can be drawn that as the respondents employ agreeable motivations, they have a higher chance of employing learning styles in their online classes or in their asynchronous classes during this pandemic. Based on the results, the better the learning style, the students tend to become more motivated. Although individuals' learning styles and methods vary, their ultimate goal is to gain knowledge, which entails the ability to detect, recall, think, and solve difficulties. As a result, if the students understand their learning styles aspects, they will be more easily motivated to learn. Correspondingly, like learning styles, learning difficulties, and coping mechanisms tend to go up in response to one another, the relationship is not very strong. In general, learning is an individual action that seeks and obtains knowledge, experience, and information through learning resources or the environment. For students, online classes or asynchronous learning during the COVID-19 pandemic is a novel experience. Even though individuals' learning styles differ, their capacity to adjust to a new situation is significant. This is further supported by Marik and others in the year 2015, who state that having a thorough understanding of learning can help students adjust their educational setting. Next, it was determined that male and female respondents significantly differed in their learning styles during this pandemic. Male and female respondents are not showing significant differences in motivation, learning difficulties, and coping mechanisms. Gender differences in learning styles have revealed that males are visually and tactily stronger than females, while females are stronger auditorially. As a result, females are more likely than males to benefit from lectures. Males are more like kinesthetic and learn best by doing rather than passively. Another significant differences in learning styles is that females enjoy learning using a variety of tactics, whereas males want more discipline and routine, especially when learning new and difficult subjects. Each person has a diversity of cognitive talents and has distinct learning styles. This was according to Jamani at the year of 2020. And according to Brusilovsky and Maybury in the year 2002, a student's learning aligns with the basics of adaptive learning methodologies. So, male and female respondents are not showing significant differences in motivation, learning difficulties, and coping mechanisms. Consequently, all students who studied had quite varied reasons for wanting to learn during this COVID-19 pandemic. What was done here is that we could not conclude that females tend to be motivated and have a lower chance of experiencing learning difficulties than males or vice versa. However, we cannot conclude that there is no difference between the two groups. Thus, all possibilities remains. Further, it found three variables significantly different employed or experienced by respondents based on their age. So these are the variables: employed motivation, encountered learning difficulties, and used coping mechanisms. It had also found that the first year, the second year, the third year, and the fourth year respondents manifested significant differences in all variables. The learning styles employed, motivation, learning difficulties experienced, and coping mechanisms used have found significant differences. So as they move from lower to higher year level in college, students will be different in terms of the learning styles they employed, the motivation that they use, difficulties that they encountered, and the coping mechanism they employed during the learning process amidst the pandemic. In learning style, Some of them preferred to learn through interacting. Some preferred learning through visual presentation, and others preferred by listening to instructions and using written notes. For example, if they learn through reading, they can benefit from online classes with study guides and textbooks. And students who learn best through visuals benefit from live lecture demonstrations or on-demand videos. Also, some of them prefer to have a silent learning environment rather than listening to music while learning. When a student has a preference for a particular learning style, then it became difficult to learn other ways, and there will be additional difficulties that the student might encounter. For difficulties, since this pandemic brought many things, including in education, to a global shutdown and led to a tremendous crisis response, migration of universities with asynchronous learning or online learning as an educational medium. They face numerous difficulties in accessing the course content, online adjustment, personal issues, adjusting to a new study environment, and issues related to technology or resources. When facing these difficulties, students from different year levels will experience dissimilar from lower year level to higher year level since they differ in the syllabus. The same goes with the motivation and coping mechanisms. Students of different year levels have different ways on being motivated and strategies to cope up with the difficulties that they experience. So, as the pandemic changed the students' learning modality in education, they have to adjust to circumstances that present them in learning hurdles that affect their learning process. And according to Ryan and Connell in 1989, motivation has a vital role in learning. After all, students on lower yield or in lower levels have less experience and environmental resources since they did not yet develop close and deep social and emotional relationships. Last but not the least is the respondents' variable coping mechanisms are significantly different based on their prevailing ethnicities. So, individuals from each respective ethnicity are more likely to use an alternative coping mechanisms such as religion. So, their coping mechanism may vary according to what they believe. They might take this kind of situation as a part of everyday living or aspect of living and develop their coping mechanisms to survive.
Recommendations. Following are some suggestions based on the conclusions. First, guidance counselors and class advisors of the campus are suggested to find a way for the students who inflict themselves physically due to failure. Second, instructors are suggested to have an action plan or catch-up plan to address the learning difficulties in online learning, even to decrease the occurrence of experiencing of the identified learning difficulties. Third, the curriculum planning team of the campus is suggested to review academic activities embedded in every syllabus vis-a-vis the time frame of the subject or course. Fourth, the students must be informed to strengthen effective coping strategies through the campus guidance counselor. And last, similar research that will unveil the effectiveness of each coping strategy vis-a-vis to each learning difficulty is encouraged to be done.